The last transmission from the ranger station came at 2:47 a.m. Just static, then breathing, then a voice that shouldn't have been possible because the ranger had been dead for 3 days. Let me ask you something. When you're alone in the woods at night, have you ever felt watched? Not by animals, by something that understands what you are, what you fear, what you'll do next. That feeling exists for a reason. The woods remember, and some cabins, isolated and forgotten, hold memories that refuse to stay buried. Tonight, I'm going to share for accounts, for cabins, for groups of people who thought they were escaping into nature's embrace, only to discover that some places are abandoned for reasons that have nothing to do with convenience or economics. These stories come from police reports, survivor testimonies, and recordings that were never meant to be heard. Each one reveals something different about what waits in the wilderness. Each one will make you question whether the weekend getaway is worth the risk. Are you ready? Because once we step into these woods together, there's no turning back. First account, the listening cabin. The Henderson family found the rental listing on a website that no longer exists. Mark Henderson remembers the details obsessively now, in the psychiatric facility where he resides. The cabin was described as rustic, authentic, off-grid experience. 20 miles from the nearest town, deep in the Adirondacks, surrounded by old-growth forest that had never been logged. The photos showed a charming frame structure with a stone fireplace, wooden furniture, and windows that promised spectacular views. What the listing didn't mention was why it had been empty for 7 years. They arrived on a Friday in October, when the leaves were already falling and the temperature dropped fast after sunset. Mark, his wife Jennifer, and their two teenagers, Kyle and Emma, a normal family seeking a normal vacation. Jennifer had been excited about disconnecting, about family time without screens. She'd made everyone leave their phones in the car, locked in the glove compartment. Just for 2 days, she'd said. We can survive to days. The cabin was exactly as advertised. Almost too perfect, Mark thought, but he dismissed the unease. The fireplace drew well. The beds were comfortable. The kitchen had everything they needed. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, they settled in for their first evening. That's when they heard the knocking. Not on the door, inside the walls. Cal heard it first, around 8 p.m. 3 deliberate knocks from inside the wall of his bedroom. He called out to his father, who checked the room, found nothing, and explained it away as the cabin settling as old wood contracting in the cold. But the knocking continued. It moved. By 9 p.m., it was in the living room walls. By 10 p.m., it had reached the kitchen. Always 3 knocks, always deliberate, always from inside. Hear us what you need to understand about sound in isolated places. Our brains evolved to interpret it as information about proximity and danger. When sound behaves impossibly, when it comes from where nothing should be, our most primitive instincts activate. The Hendersons were experiencing what psychologists call acoustic dread, the recognition that the rules governing normal life had been suspended. Jennifer suggested they leave. Mark refused. He'd paid for the weekend, and he wasn't going to let some quirk of architecture ruin it. That decision would haunt him forever. Around midnight, the knocking stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. It was absolute. No wind, no animal sounds, no creaking wood, just emptiness that pressed against their eardrums like water pressure. Emma started crying, softly at first, then with increasing panic. She said the silence was wrong, that it was listening to them. And then they heard the voice. It came from the basement they'd been told didn't exist. The rental listing had specified that the cabin was built on a concrete slab, but the voice rose from beneath them, from a space that shouldn't be there, speaking in a whisper that somehow filled the entire cabin. It knew their names, not just their first names. It knew Jennifer's maiden name. It knew about Mark's father, who died when Mark was 12. It knew about Kyle's secret fear of deep water, something he'd never told anyone. It whispered these intimacies like a family member sharing memories, except the voice was wrong. It sounded like multiple people speaking in unison, slightly out of sync, creating a chorus of whispers that echoed up through the floorboards. Mark Henderson, Jennifer Price Henderson. Kyle. Emma. We've been waiting. Mark tried the front door. It opened easily. The car was 50 feet away, but none of them could move. Have you ever experienced true paralysis? Not from physical restraint, but from fear so profound it shuts down your voluntary motor functions. That's what held them. The voice continued, describing things. What Jennifer looked like sleeping. What Kyle had dreamed last Tuesday. What Emma had written in her diary that afternoon before they left. We listened. The voices said, "We've always been listening. Now you'll listen to us." The knocking resumed, but now it was everywhere. In the walls, in the ceiling, in the floor. A cacophony of knocking that created rhythm, then melody, then something like speech. The cabin itself was communicating, using the knocks to form words through pattern and repetition. And what it said, what it demanded, was that they go down. Mark finally broke the paralysis. He grabbed his family and ran for the door. But the cabin had changed. The door that had opened easily moments before now led to a wall. Not a blocked door, the door opened, but behind it was solid wood, as if they were inside a box. Mark tried the windows. Same result. The glass opened, but beyond it was more cabin wall, extending impossibly. The voice laughed. Every surface laughed. The sound came from the wood itself, vibrating through timber and nails and stone. "You're already down," it said. "You went down when you stepped inside. There is no up anymore. There's only listening." Kyle found the basement door. It had appeared in the kitchen wall, where there had been cabinets before. It was open, revealing stairs descending into darkness that moved like liquid. The knocking grew frantic, insistent. The voice changed tone, becoming commanding, angry. "Down, come down. See what we are. See what you'll become." Jennifer collapsed. Emma was catatonic, her eyes fixed on something the others couldn't see. Mark held them, praying to a God he'd stopped believing in years ago, as the cabin contracted around them. The walls were moving inward, slowly but perceptibly. The space was shrinking. That's when Mark noticed the writing on the walls. It hadn't been there before, or perhaps it had been invisible until that moment. Carved into every wooden surface were names. Hundreds of names. Thousands. Families. Couples. Individuals. All listed with dates. The most recent was from 7 years ago. A family of 4. The bishops. Below their names was a message. "We listen forever now. It never stops. Help us. Please help us." Mark made a decision born of desperation. He grabbed the fire axe from beside the fireplace and began chopping at the floor. If there was a basement, there was a foundation. If there was a foundation, there might be a way out. He swung the axe with strength he didn't know he possessed, while the voice screamed at him, while the knocking became thunder, while his family huddled together watching him try to save them. The axe broke through. Below was not a basement. It was a space that extended down and down and down, farther than his flashlight could reach. And in that darkness, things moved. He could hear them, bodies shifting, breathing, whispering. The families, all the families, still listening, still waiting, still hoping for rescue that would never come. Mark pulled his family away from the hole. He had one option left: the fireplace. Fire needs air. Air means a connection to the outside. He gathered every piece of furniture, every curtain, every flammable object, and built a pyre. He lit it. The flames rose, hungry and hot, consuming the cabin's interior. Smoke filled the space, choking them, but Mark kept feeding the fire. The voice changed again. It sounded afraid. The knocking became frantic, desperate. The cabin was burning, and whatever lived in its structure was feeling it. Mark found the chimney, now exposed by the fire. He boosted Jennifer up, then Emma, then Kyle. He climbed last, as flames licked at his legs and the voice below screamed promises and threats and pleas. They emerged on the roof, into clean night air, and jumped. Mark broke his leg in the fall. Kyle fractured his wrist, but they ran, limping and crying and dragging each other toward the car. Behind them, The cabin burned like a torch in the darkness, illuminating the surrounding forest in flickering orange light. As they drove away, Mark looked back once. The cabin was consumed entirely now, but he could swear he saw faces in the flames. Not faces of fire, but faces in the smoke, watching them go. Hundreds of faces. The ones who listened. The ones who'd never left. The authorities found the ruins 3 days later. The foundation was concrete slab, just as advertised. No basement, no space below. But in the ashes, they found bones. Dozens of sets of human remains, buried in shallow graves around the property. Missing persons from decades past. Families who rented a cabin and never returned. Mark Henderson doesn't sleep anymore. When he closes his eyes, he hears knocking. 3 deliberate knocks coming from inside his skull. The doctors say it's trauma, PTSD manifesting as auditory hallucination. But Mark knows better. He knows because on quiet nights, he hears the voice too, still whispering his name, still inviting him down. We listen. It says, "And now, Mark Henderson, you listen to die forever." Second account, the feeding cabin. Sarah Chin went to the cabin alone, which was her first mistake. Her second mistake was ignoring the smell. She was a nature photographer, specializing in wildlife, and she rented the place for a month to capture the autumn migration patterns of elk. In the Montana highlands, the cabin was remote 40 minutes on a dirt road from the nearest paved highway, but it had electricity, running water, and, most importantly, proximity to the elk corridors. Perfect for her work. The smell hit her when she opened the door. Rotten meat, sweet and thick, underlying the must of a long-closed space. Sarah assumed a rodent had died in the walls. Unpleasant, but not unusual in rural rentals. She opened windows, lit candles, and unpacked her equipment. The cabin was small. One room serving as bedroom and living space, a kitchenette, a bathroom added on as an obvious afterthought. The furniture was minimal: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, shelves. The walls were decorated with old photographs of hunting parties from the 1970s and 80s. Men in flannel and orange vests posing with elk and deer and bear. Smiling men, proud of their kills. Sarah noticed something odd about the photographs. In each one, in the background, you could see the cabin. Same cabin, unchanged across decades. But in every photo, the cabin's windows were dark, except for one. The small window above the kitchen sink always showed a pale blur, like a face pressed against the glass from inside, looking out at the hunters and their prey. She told herself it was a reflection or a smudge on the lens. She had work to do. That first night, Sarah woke to sounds outside. Chewing sounds, wet and rhythmic, accompanied by breaking bone and tearing sinew. She grabbed her flashlight and looked out the window. 20 feet from the cabin, in the moonlight, she saw an elk. A massive bull, at least 800 pounds, lying on its side. Something was feeding on it. She couldn't see what it was. The shape was wrong to large in some places, to angular in others, moving in ways that didn't match any predator she knew. As she watched, trying to make sense of the silhouette, the feeding stopped. The shape straightened up and turned toward the cabin, toward her window, toward her light. Sarah dropped to the floor, heart hammering. She waited, counting seconds, then minutes. When she finally looked again, everything was gone. The elk. The shape. No blood. No evidence that anything had been there at all, except the smell had gotten worse. Have you ever noticed how smell is our most primitive sense, the one most directly connected to our survival instincts? Sarah's brain was screaming at her to leave, to run, that the smell meant death. But she stayed. She was on assignment. She had a deadline. She couldn't afford to lose the deposit and find new accommodation. The next day, she found the feeding station. It was behind the cabin, hidden by overgrown brush. A circular clearing, maybe 20 feet in diameter, where nothing grew. The earth was black and oily, saturated with decomposed organic matter. Bones littered the perimeter. Elk bones, deer bones, smaller animal bones. And in the center was a trough carved from stone, stained dark with old blood. Sarah photographed everything. As a documentarian, her instinct was to record, to capture evidence. She noticed the trough had words carved into its rim in a language she didn't recognize. The letters were angular, harsh, reminiscent of ancient Germanic runes, but distinctly different. That evening, she researched the symbols online. What she found made her blood run cold. The markings were similar to Norse sacrificial inscriptions, offerings to entities that predated the Viking pantheon. Old gods, hungry gods, beings that existed in the spaces between civilization and wilderness, feeding on the boundary between human and animal. The inscription, roughly translated, said, "Feed the watcher, feed it flesh, keep it satisfied, or become the feast." Sarah should have left then, but she was a rational person. She believed in science and documentation and evidence-based reasoning. This was just coincidence, folklore, superstition. She decided to stay one more night to get her photographs to complete her assignment. That night, the feeding sounds returned, but this time, they were closer, right outside the cabin walls, and this time, they were accompanied by something else. Breathing, heavy, labored breathing that rattled with fluid and hunger. It circled the cabin, pausing at each window, at each door, testing, searching. Sarah sat in the center of the room, clutching a knife from the kitchen, knowing it would be useless but needing to hold something. The breathing continued for hours. Sometimes it sounded like one creature, sometimes like many. The smell intensified until she gagged, until breathing itself became an act of will. Then the scratching started. Not claws on wood doors. It sounded like fingers. Human fingers scraping at the door, at the window frames, persistent and patient. And with the scratching came a voice. Hungry. It said, simple, direct. So hungry. Feed me. You promised. They all promised. Sarah hadn't promised anything, but the cabin had. That's what she understood. In that moment of crystal clear terror, the cabin was a contract. By staying there, by occupying that space, she'd entered into an agreement made long ago by those smiling hunters in the photographs. They'd made a deal with something in these woods. Feed it, keep it satisfied, and it would ensure successful hunts, full freezers, prosperity. But the hunters had stopped coming. The cabin had been empty for years. And the thing that had been promised food, the entity that had been fed regularly for decades, was starving. You're here now, the voice said, almost reasonable. You'll feed me, or you'll be the feed. Those are the terms. Those have always been the terms. The door began to splinter, not from force from decay. The wood was rotting before her eyes, disintegrating into black pulp as if time itself was accelerating. Within minutes, there would be no barrier. Within minutes, she would see what had been breathing and scratching and waiting. Sarah ran to the kitchenette, her mind racing. Feed it. The inscription said feed it. She tore open the small refrigerator, finding the steaks she brought for her own meals. She grabbed them, raw and cold, and threw them toward the door. The scratching stopped. The breathing intensified. She heard consumption rapid, desperate eating. The steaks were gone in seconds. Then the breathing resumed. Closer now. More. The voice said. More. Not enough. Never enough. Decades of hunger. You owe decades. Sarah grabbed everything. All her food. Vegetables, bread, cheese, everything. She threw it all toward the disintegrating door. The thing ate it all, and still it wasn't satisfied. Meat, it said. I need meat. Living meat. Warm meat. Blood meat. Sarah understood. It didn't want food. It wanted prey. It wanted the hunt, the kill, the fierce-spiced flesh of something that had run and struggled and died. It wanted what the hunters had promised it. She made a decision. She grabbed her camera, her most expensive piece of equipment, and hurled it through the window. She heard it smash outside. Then she ran to the opposite side of the cabin and smashed out the window too. She was creating exits, options, routes of escape. I'm leaving, she screamed. The contract is broken. I'm not a hunter. I didn't make your deal. I owe you nothing. The breathing became a roar. The cabin shook. Sarah dove through the broken window, feeling glass tear her skin. not caring. She hit the ground running, sprinting toward her car, 50 yards that felt like miles. Behind her, she heard the cabin collapse. Not fall collapse inward, imploding, as if something impossibly large had occupied an impossibly small space and was now expanding into its true form. She reached her car, fumbled with keys, got the engine started. As she reversed wildly down the dirt road, her headlights illuminated what stood in the cabin's ruins. It was tall, impossibly tall, 12 feet, maybe 15, with proportions that hurt to look at. Too many joints in the limbs, too many angles in the torso. Its head was crowned with elk antlers, massive and complex, but the skull beneath was almost human. Almost. The mouth was wrong to wide, opening vertically instead of horizontally, lined with teeth that looked scavenged from a dozen different species. And it was still hungry. She could see it in its posture, in the way it swayed, in the way it watched her drive away with eyes that reflected her headlights like an animal's. Sarah Chin made it to the highway. She drove straight to the police, who found the cabin's remains, but nothing else. No bones, no feeding station, no entity, just rotted wood and a bad smell that lingered for weeks. She quit nature photography. Now she works in a studio, photographing newborns and families in controlled environments with bright lights and locked doors. But sometimes, late at night, she wakes to the smell of rotten meat, and she knows it's still hungry, still waiting, still remembering the one that got away. Third account, the watching cabin. The Blackwood cabin was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Tom and Lisa had been married for 8 years, and their relationship had grown stale in the way relationships do. When life's routine replaces passion, they decided on a week in the Appalachian Mountains, in a cabin Lisa had found through a friend of a friend. Totally private, she promised. We won't see another soul. She was right about that, but privacy doesn't mean being alone. They arrived on Sunday afternoon, spirits high despite the 3-hour drive on increasingly deteriorating roads. The cabin was beautiful, a renovated log structure with a wraparound porch, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic forest views, and modern amenities hidden behind rustic charm. Inside were thoughtful touches, fresh flowers and a vase, a bottle of local wine on the counter, a handwritten welcome note from the owner. "Enjoy your stay," the note read. "The cabin sees everything, so feel free to be yourselves." An odd phrasing, Lisa thought, but she dismissed it as quirky hospitality. They spent the first day settling in, hiking a nearby trail, making dinner together. It was nice, comfortable. That night, as they lay in bed, Lisa felt Tom tense beside her. "Do you feel that?" he asked. "Feel what?" "Like we're being watched." Lisa laughed. "It's the wilderness. Everything watches everything out here. Prey and predators, remember?" But she felt it too. A pressure on her skin, a crawling awareness that prickled the back of her neck. She blamed it on being in an unfamiliar place, on the absolute darkness outside the windows, on the sounds of the forest adjusting to night. The next morning, Lisa found the cameras. They weren't hidden, exactly. They were incorporated into the decor. A smoke detector in the bedroom, but the lens was visible if you looked closely. A decorative wood now on the living room shelf. Its eyes were too reflective to focused. The mirror in the bathroom, a slight gap in the frame revealing circuitry. Lisa showed Tom. His face went pale, then red with anger. "We're leaving," he said, "right now. This is illegal. This is..." "Wait," Lisa interrupted. She found something else. A leather journal on the bookshelf, spine labeled guest book. She opened it. The entries were disturbing, not because of what they said, but because of how they were written. Each entry started normally, guests commenting on the beautiful cabin, the peaceful setting, the wonderful vacation. But then the handwriting would change mid-entry, becoming frantic, cramped, desperate. One entry from 6 months prior, from a couple named David and Michelle. "Beautiful cabin. So peaceful. The views are spectacular." Handwriting changes. It knows what we said. It heard the fight. It's showing us, God. It's showing us everything we've ever done wrong. Every lie, every betrayal. We can see ourselves in the windows. But it's not now, it's every moment we've hurt each other. Playing on loop in the glass. We can't stop watching. We have to watch several smudged lines. Possibly tears or water damage. We deserve this. Another entry from a family. Kids love it here. Handwriting changes. They're showing us what the children will become. In the windows, in the mirrors, we see them grown. We see the mistakes we'll make, the ways we'll fail them. Every possible future where we ruin their lives. We can't look away. The cabin won't let us look away. Tom grabbed the journal from Lisa's hands and threw it across the room. We're leaving now. They packed in minutes, threw everything in the car, and drove for the main road. 10 minutes down the mountain, they found their path blocked. A massive tree had fallen across the road. Its trunk thick enough that driving around was impossible. That wasn't there yesterday, Lisa said. They stared at the tree. Its fall was recent, sap still bleeding, leaves still green. But there was no storm last night, no wind, no reason for it to fall except that it did. Precisely where and when it needed to block their escape. Tom tried his phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. We hike out, he decided. Follow the road on foot. Eventually, we'll get to somewhere with cell service. They walked for 2 hours. The road seemed longer than they remembered, winding endlessly through identical forest. Then Lisa recognized a landmark, the distinctive lightning scar pine. They passed right before reaching the cabin. They'd walked in a complete circle. That's impossible, Tom said. But the cabin stood before them, exactly as they left it, door open, lights on, welcoming them back. Here's what you need to understand about space and isolated places. We trust our senses to give us consistent information about our environment. When space itself becomes unreliable, when paths lead where they shouldn't, our fundamental understanding of reality breaks down. Tom and Lisa were experiencing what paranormal researchers call spatial recursion, being trapped in a loop where all paths return to the same point. They tried again and again, different directions, different strategies. Every attempt led back to the cabin. By nightfall, they were exhausted, terrified, and out of options. Fine, Lisa said. We'll stay tonight. In the morning, we'll try again. But they both knew the cabin wanted them to stay, and what the cabin wanted, it got. That night, the watching revealed its true nature. They sat in the living room, avoiding the bedroom with its obvious camera, trying to stay alert. Around midnight, the windows changed. They no longer showed the dark forest outside. Instead, they showed the interior of the cabin, but not the current moment. Different moments, different angles, different versions of Tom and Lisa. One window showed them fighting, a vicious argument they'd had 3 years ago, words they'd both tried to forget. Another window showed Lisa, alone in the cabin that afternoon, looking at Tom's phone, reading messages from a woman Tom worked with. Nothing inappropriate in the messages, but Lisa's face in the window showed suspicion, doubt, the birth of distrust. Another window showed Tom, watching Lisa unpack, his expression not loving but calculating, thinking about their joint bank account, wondering if he could afford to leave. The windows were showing truth, not the truth they performed for each other, but the hidden truth, the private thoughts, the moments of weakness and ugliness that everyone has but no one speaks aloud. It's not real, Tom said, but his voice shook. It's manipulation. Cameras can't show thoughts. Then the windows showed the future. Tom, 5 years older, signing divorce papers in a lawyer's office. Lisa, crying in an empty apartment. Tom with another woman, happy, guiltily happy. Lisa alone, bitter, wondering where it all went wrong. No, Lisa whispered, that's not, we can change that. That doesn't have to happen. The cabin responded. The windows shifted, showing different futures. Tom dead in a car accident. Next year, Lisa at his funeral, genuinely grieving, realizing too late that she loved him. Lisa sick, Tom caring for her with resentment, counting the days until obligation ends. Endless variations of misery, each one plausible, each one possible. What do you want? Tom screamed at the empty cabin. "What are you trying to show us?" The handwritten welcome note, lifted from the counter where they left it, carried by no visible force, floating in the air before them. The words rearranged themselves, ink flowing like water across the paper, forming new sentences. "I show you yourselves, without pretense, without lies. Most can't bear it, but those who can, who look and accept and still choose each other, they're free to go. The tree moves, the path opens. But first you must watch. You must see. You must know what you're choosing." Tom and Lisa looked at each other. Really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. They saw middle-aged people carrying extra weight, showing lines around their eyes. Neither attractive nor ugly, but simply real. They saw fear. They saw doubt. They also saw familiarity, shared history, the comfort of known quantity versus unknown terror. "I read your messages," Lisa said quietly. "This afternoon. I'm sorry." "I know," Tom replied. "I checked the phone logs tonight. It's okay. I think about leaving sometimes. So do I." They sat in silence as the windows continued their display. Every fight, every kindness, every moment of connection and disconnection. The cabin was relentless, showing them 7 years of marriage, and fast forward, forcing them to witness their own relationship from the outside. Hours passed. Dawn approached, and somewhere in that long night of enforced honesty, something shifted. They started talking, really talking, about the messages, about the doubts, about the futures they feared and the futures they hoped for. The cabin listened, the cameras recorded, but somehow the watching felt less predatory, more like a mirror. Uncomfortable but necessary. When the sun rose, Tom stood and walked to the door. He expected it to be locked, to lead nowhere, but it opened normally. Outside, the tree that had blocked the road was gone. The path down the mountain was clear. "We can go now," he said. Lisa joined him. They stood in the doorway, looking at freedom. "Do we?" she asked. "Just go. Pretend this didn't happen." "I don't want to pretend anymore," Tom said. "I don't think I can." They left the cabin, drove down the mountain, returned to their normal lives. But they were different. They'd been watched, truly watched, and survived it. They'd seen themselves through an unforgiving lens and chosen to continue anyway. 6 months later, they returned to the cabin. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They spent a weekend there, knowing the cameras were recording, not caring. They talked, they argued, they reconciled, they were honest. And when they left, they felt lighter. The cabin still watches. That's its nature. But watching can be many things. It can be violation. It can also be witness. Tom and Lisa chose to be witnessed, to have their truth recorded, to exist without pretense. Not everyone makes the choice. The guest book has many entries from people who couldn't bear what they saw, who fled into the forest and were never found. But for those few who can face themselves completely, the cabin opens its doors and lets them leave. The question is, could you? If every hidden thought, every secret action, every possible future was displayed before you, could you still choose the life you have? Could you bear being truly known? Fourth account, The Remembering Cabin. The last story isn't about a cabin that's haunted. It's about a cabin that haunts you. Detective James Morrison found it while investigating a missing persons case. 3 hikers had disappeared in the Ozark National Forest, last seen heading toward an area marked on old forestry maps as Settlers Rest. The name referred to a 19th century homestead, supposedly abandoned since the 1920s. But local folklore claimed the cabin still stood, unchanged and untouched by time. Morrison was skeptical. He was a practical man, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, who believed in evidence and procedure. But the case had gone cold, and chasing folklore was better than doing nothing. He found the cabin exactly where the old maps indicated, in a valley so remote that modern GPS couldn't pinpoint it. The structure was impossibly preserved, no rot, no weather damage, but was looking freshly hewn despite being over a century old. Inside was fully furnished with period-appropriate items: a cast iron stove, a rope bed, wooden table and chairs, oil lamps, no dust, no decay, as if someone had just stepped out and would return any moment. Morrison documented everything with his camera, searching for evidence of the missing hikers. He found nothing, no signs of recent occupation, no disturbance, no clues. Just an anachronistic cabin. That shouldn't exist. Then he noticed the photographs. They were daguerreotypes, the earliest form of photography, displayed on a shelf. Portraits of a family, a stern-faced man, a tired-looking woman, 3 children of varying ages. Standard 19th century family portrait, except for one detail that made Morrison's blood run cold. The man in the photograph was wearing Morrison's watch. The exact watch, a distinctive vintage Omega that had belonged to Morrison's grandfather, that Morrison wore on his left wrist at that very moment. He looked closer. The watch in the 150-year-old photograph was identical. Same scratches on the crystal, same worn leather band, same everything. Morrison told himself it was coincidence. Many watches look similar, but then he noticed the woman's dress. She was wearing a locket tan through the magnifying glass he'd brought for examining evidence. He could see that the locket bore initials. His mother's initials. His mother who'd worn that exact locket until her death 5 years prior. The children in the photograph were harder to identify, but Morrison found similarities that made him deeply uncomfortable. The oldest boy had a birthmark on his neck, same location and shape as Morrison's own birthmark. The daughter had his sister's distinctive eye color, one brown and one green, a rare genetic trait. It was his family, somehow, impossibly. A photograph from the 1860s showed his family, wearing his possessions, staring at him across a century and a half. Morrison turned to leave. That's when he heard his daughter's voice. Daddy, Emily, his 8-year-old daughter, currently safe at home 300 miles away with his ex-wife. But her voice came from the bedroom, clear and close. Daddy, I'm scared. Where are you? Morrison's training warred with his paternal instinct. He knew it couldn't be Emily, but what if it was? What if somehow his daughter was here, frightened, needing him? He opened the bedroom door. The room was empty, except for one of the children from the photograph. She stood facing away from him, wearing a period dress, her hair in ringlets. She turned slowly. It was Emily, his daughter's face on a 19th century child. She looked at him with eyes full of tears and terror. You left us, she said. You left us here, and we've been waiting so long. Morrison stumbled backward. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. But Emily were the thing wearing. Emily's face stepped toward him, aging with each step. 8 years old became 18, became 30, became 50, skin wrinkling, hair graying, until an old woman stood before him, still with his daughter's eyes. You don't remember yet, she said, but you will. That's what this place does. It makes you remember what hasn't happened yet, the future that's already passed, the choices you haven't made, but already regret. The cabin changed around Morrison. The 19th century furnishings flickered, overlaid with different versions. He saw the cabin in the future's retirement home, where he'd live alone after his daughter stopped speaking to him, because he'd chosen work over her dance recital, her graduation, her wedding. He saw himself old and bitter in this cabin, surrounded by photographs of a family he'd neglected until they became strangers. Then the cabin showed him further futures, his daughter visiting him here. Duty visits filled with uncomfortable silences. His death in this cabin, alone, found weeks later. His funeral? Sparsely attended. No, Morrison said, that's not I love my daughter. I'm a good father. You will be a good father, the aged Emily said. Or you won't. The choice hasn't been made yet. But we remember both futures. The cabin remembers everything that could be. We live here, in the space between possibility and reality, waiting for you to decide which version of us becomes real. Morrison ran. He burst through the front door and kept running, crashing through underbrush, not caring about the trail, needing only distance between himself and that cabin. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, and when he looked back, the cabin was gone. Not hidden by trees, gone. The valley empty as if it had never been there. He made it back to civilization, filed his report as areas searched, no evidence found, and tried to forget. But the cabin had done something to him. It had shown him a possible future, and now he couldn't stop thinking about it. He started making different choices, small ones at first. Leaving work on time instead of working late, calling Emily more often. Then bigger choices, requesting a transfer to a position with better hours, prioritizing his daughter over career advancement. His ex-wife noticed. "What happened to you?" she asked, surprised but pleased by his newfound involvement in Emily's life. Morrison didn't know how to answer. How could he explain that he'd seen his own lonely death in a cabin that didn't exist? That he'd met his daughter as an old woman who'd grown up without him? That a 19th century homestead had shown him the cost of his ambitions? He kept searching for the missing hikers. The case remained unsolved, but Morrison developed a theory, one he could never put in an official report. The cabin didn't kill people. It showed them their possible futures, and some people, seeing what they might become, chose to disappear rather than face it. They walked into the forest and kept walking, abandoning their present to avoid their future. Or maybe they stayed in the cabin, trapped between what was and what could be, living in that space where time folded on itself. Maybe the family in the photograph had been real people once, who'd stepped into the cabin and saw their descendants, including Morrison, and been unable to leave the loop. Years later, Morrison's daughter graduated college. He was there, front row, cheering. That night, she hugged him and said, "I'm glad you're my dad. I'm glad you've always been there." Morrison thought about the cabin, about the version of Emily who'd aged before his eyes, bitter and abandoned, about the choice he'd made, the future he'd avoided. "Me too," he said. "Me too." The cabin still stands, somewhere in the Ozark National Forest. It appears on no modern maps, but it exists in that space between recorded and forgotten, between present and future. It's waiting for the next person who needs to remember what they haven't experienced yet, to see the cost of their choices before they make them. Would you go looking for it? Would you want to see your possible futures, to know what you might become? Or is it better to live in ignorance, to make choices without knowing their full consequences? These for cabins: the one that listens, the one that feeds, the one that watches, the one that remembers. They represent different kinds of horror, not the horror of monsters or violence, but something more profound. They're mirrors that reflect uncomfortable truths about isolation, hunger, honesty, and time. They exist in the spaces between civilization and wilderness, between what we pretend to be and what we actually are. The woods are full of cabins. Most are exactly what they appear to be: shelter, refuge, a break from modern life. But some cabins are different. Some cabins are alive in ways we don't have language to describe. They're not haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by possibility, by the darkness we carry inside ourselves, by the futures we fear, and the past we can't escape. So when you rent that remote cabin for your next vacation, when you're unpacking in a space that smells slightly wrong, or feels to watched, or stands to perfectly preserved, ask yourself, what does this cabin want to show me? What truth am I about to face? And then decide if you're brave enough to stay, because some retreats aren't about escape. They're about confrontation, and what you confront might just be yourself, reflected in wood and stone and shadow, waiting for you to finally see what you've been running from all along. The forest doesn't sleep. The cabins don't either. They're always there, always ready, always hungry for the next guest who thinks they're seeking peace, but is actually seeking revelation. Sweet dreams. Try not to listen to the knocking.